and welcome to this special session for the OLLI New Yorker class at California State University, Fullerton. We will have a question and answer period following the presentation. Please leave any questions you may have for our speaker in the chat box. At the conclusion of this presentation, our class discussion will continue in our regular format. And here to introduce our guest is the president of Cal State University Fullerton, Dr. Verjee.
Well, hey, everybody. It's great to be here on behalf of all the faculty and staff and students of Cal State Fullerton. I want to welcome you all to this very special OLLI event. It is really a special event. You know, it's funny. An OLLI used to be something I did when I was a kid on a skateboard. It was like this weird thing that you did on a skateboard. Not anymore, not for me. Like some of you, my better half now hides my skateboard. I can't use that anymore. But I still get excited when I hear the word OLLI because it's one of my favorite programs and favorite places on campus. And with 60 rapidly approaching for me in just 2 months, the OLLI trolley is now a new, much safer way of transport for me than the skateboard. So I want to begin by thanking Barbara Rosen for inviting me and also thanking all of you for being here. Thank you, thank you. I really do love OLLI and I cherish the time that I have, the honor I have of spending time with you. Every year I try to visit with OLLI at least a couple of times a year. And every time it is truly a party. It's a learning experience like no other. You know, I've been to ice cream socials and a live band, and I even was at the flash mob, which was obviously wonderful. And we are very proud of all the high impact educational practices that we provide for our undergraduate students at Cal State Fullerton. We call them HIPS. So we have OLLI and HIPS. I love all these acronyms, right? But it's our OLLI programs that continue to provide some of the best HIPS on our campus. Not just with live music and ice cream socials, but with engaging curriculum and life-changing lectures. And not just for OLLI students, but for all of our students. Let me tell you what I mean by that. You know, I posted a video on social media. I post videos on social media all the time. You know, whether it's trying to rap, which is always a fun thing to do, or driving our Baja Racer all over the campus, or me getting out our Titan Pride message by any means necessary. On Twitter, these videos, they usually get 1,000 views or something like that, and I'm really happy. But 2 years ago, this very week, I posted a video of a certain OLLI flash mob during the doing the Michael Jackson Thriller dance in front of the Pollock Library. You probably remember it. And it's still one of the most currently watched videos I've ever tweeted. And my favorite part of that is if you watch that, you notice undergraduate students all around the OLLI flash mob grooving and smiling and enjoying every minute of that. And that's just a microcosm of what we do, of what you do. You engage this campus, you make it more vibrant and fun and a community, and you make it more of a home for all of us, including our students. And through those HIPS, those high impact practices, like the one we're going to enjoy here today, the next generation of Titans see the value of lifelong learning and being engaged with their community. In short, everyone wants to be part of OLLI, including our award-winning journalists like Evan that we have today, who I'm tremendously honored to welcome here today. Now, in preparing for this introduction, I read Evan's new book, which I will tell you is amazing. I really recommend it to all of you. But I also know you're here to discuss his recent New Yorker article, Can Biden Hold the Center? So I will set the table with this quote from that piece. The implication of age in one form or another hovers over this presidential race. With the two oldest candidates in presidential history, that is clearly a relevant point, and even more relevant at this point made by the Seton Hall professor that Evan quoted in his article, who said, demographically, politically, economically, socially, and technologically, these generations are more different from each other now than at any other time in living memory. What better way to illustrate the importance of OLLI on our campus than those two statements? Our OLLI members are bridging the gap between generations and thousands of on-campus volunteer positions as student mentors, as teachers, as teaching assistants, lecturers, research subjects, consultants, and even faculty mentors. And I would even argue that it's our OLLI members' omnipresence on our campus that's helped negate the blame, to blame it on gerontocracy, that narrative that Evan mentions in his article. And it isn't that one of the primary benefits of diversity? It negates stereotypes and blame through inclusion and understanding. We talk a lot about diversity on our campus. Not an excuse or a crutch, but a strength that we can and we have to leverage to create collaborative and vibrant learning communities. And OLLI members are a huge part of that diversity, of that diversification. Age diversity and wisdom, life experience and professional acumen, and of course, high impact practices like this. I think it's a national model that we bring to our campus and a national voice. And Evan is clearly one of those voices. I'm so excited and proud to have him here. As I mentioned, I read his book, Joe Biden, The Life, The Run, and What Matters Now. And I have to confess, I didn't read it. I listened to him read it to me while I took my walks every day, which was even better, I have to tell you. And if you haven't read it, I really recommend it. I loved it. I also loved his New Yorker piece that we are here to discuss. And I actually just love the honor of having to introduce him. Who is this guy? He's a staff writer for the New Yorker. He's a frequent guest on various national news outlets. He's a Pulitzer Prize winner and a 3-time recipient of the Overseas Press Club Award. He's a giant in his industry, and that makes me so proud and makes me so fortunate to have him here. So thank you, Evan. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your tremendous work and contribution to your field and to our nation, because the discourse that you create, the discussion that you create is essential to our nation. So thank you for being a Titan today. You are a Titan today and every day hereafter. I know you're a Harvard graduate. I get that. But let me tell you something. We have an alum, Congressman Lou Correa, that he calls Cal State Fullerton the Harvard of the West. So I guess in a way, you should feel like you're at home. And if it doesn't feel like home yet, I promise you, after you're done with this group, it will feel like home. OLLI members, without any further delay, please join me in giving a rounding applause for Evan Osnos and a warm Titan welcome. Welcome, welcome, Evan. Great to have you.
Thank you so much. That is just a wonderful welcome, President Berge. I'm really grateful for that very kind mention at the outset. I have to tell you that as you have a very positive association with the OLLI program, I am predisposed to be in favor already because my son's name is Ollie. As Barbara Rosen knows, it means that it landed with me in very good terms. And I am very appreciative to Barbara for inviting me to come today. And I am just, as a general matter, a huge fan of what you're doing, the process of finding subjects that you find interesting and that continue to challenge us and teach us along the way. It's something I very much believe in myself here. And, at this stage in my writing career, I'm now, whatever I am, about 20 years into it. I'm 43, and I find that the more I learn, the more I do, the less I feel like I know, and the more challenged I feel by the responsibility to learn more. I'm going to talk for just about 10 or 15 minutes just to set the scene for us and talk a bit about this business of writing for the New Yorker. I want to tell you first a little bit about where I am and why. This may look like I'm sort of doing a hostage video, but I can promise you I am making this statement of my own volition. The reason why I'm in a room like this that is not as beautifully adorned as yours is because this is the little office that I go to when, shall we say, I need to flee the loving embrace of my children to get some writing done. So this is, I am talking to you here from the place where I can get some thinking and some reading and some writing done. And it is a great pleasure to be able to join you for that process. I thought I would sort of begin today by talking about the obvious question, which is, what is it like to work at the New Yorker magazine? What is this place? What do we do? How do we do it? Why do we do it? I've often thought, I've been there now for 12 years. I was a newspaper reporter before that, but I was always interested in the New Yorker. There's something about the style of the storytelling resonated with me. And I started pitching them little stories when I was in my 20s, trying to get them to pay any attention. And they most of the time ignored it. Occasionally I got a rejection, which felt actually like progress. At least they were replying. And then one thing led to another, by which I mean I was fortunate. I wrote some newspaper stories that got some attention, won some awards, and then that gave me the opportunity to then pitch some stories to the New Yorker. And I was hired while living in China, the place that I had devoted much of my career to studying. I'd been studying the language since college, and it was a case where the New Yorker wanted more writing about China. And I was very fortunate to be there at that moment. And like so much in life, timing. And so what is the New Yorker? It is, if I had to honestly assign a description to it, I would describe it as a sort of collection of like-minded eccentrics. And I mean that in every way of that sentence, in the sense that it is not the same as a newspaper, obviously. It is not quite the same as a regular news magazine, which is essentially seeking to try to provide a synthesis or a digest of the week's events. It is this other thing. It's motivated by a combination of qualities, of aesthetic qualities, of literary qualities, of news qualities, and one hopes of moral qualities, a kind of sense of urgency that there are issues that require investigation that are a little bit different. And we sometimes joke that, we're just this simple comic weekly that was born 100 years ago and just, putting some dog cartoons on the page with a couple of little stories and out the door it goes. But, it is actually something, it feels to us like much more of a vocation in the truest sense, that you either understand what it is what those qualities are, or you don't. I'll give you an example, a literal example of what I mean. The very first, there are a couple of sort of attributes of the New Yorker that are specific. Number one, I would say, is kind of celebrating the strange imperfection of life. I wrote a piece, the very first piece I ever pitched to the New Yorker that they accepted. I was writing it essentially on nights and weekends while working at the newspaper. And it was a story about a boxer in China, basically the sort of most promising boxer in the country. He was supposed to win a gold medal in the Olympics in 2008. And I was interested in all of the pressures that would go into being in that position, a whole country's imaginings thrust onto the shoulders of this little person. I mean, he was quite literally a tiny person because he was in the smallest weight class of the Olympic boxing event. And I did everything I could. I, went to his hometown. I spent time with him. I traveled overseas with him. I did everything I could think of. I submitted my draft. And my editor said, this is all wrong. And I didn't quite understand what he meant. And he said, you've been reading all the great boxing writers, haven't you, right? And I said, well, yeah, I've been reading them. I've been marinating myself. I've been absorbing all of the great, Joyce Carol Oates and A.J. Liebling and everybody. I've done everything I can. And he said, and that's part of the problem. What you've done is you've written a boxing story. And what you need to do is put aside everything that you think is required of a piece of that kind and write without any of those crutches, without any of those cliches that are such a part of the kind of the aroma of a piece of writing. And you could apply that principle to whether we're talking about travel writing or book reviewing or politics, the goal is very often to try to say, let's not slot this into some imagined idea of what a boxing story is about a fighter with a heart of gold and a corner man who is kind of, terse and remote and plays the role of the father figure. No, you actually are trying to subvert as much as you can some of those pre-existing narratives that we have in our mind. And so it was quite freeing. And so I mentioned the word eccentricity at the outset, because that's part of it, is that you have to have a bit of a belief in the delightful eccentricity of real life. The arc of the story is often not exactly what you would imagine. The other thing that I think sets it apart, makes it a bit of a different place to work, is the pace. We practice something that we call slow journalism. You've heard of slow food. You've heard of, there aren't that many things left in life that are slow, and we kind of relish it. Yeah, okay, sometimes you have to crank things out. I mean, I've done stuff at times that are furiously fast. I mean, I once flew to Japan and wrote a story about the earthquake in Fukushima over the course of just a few days. But most of the time, what we try to do is actually slow down and act and try to approximate the passage of time as it actually is felt in life. And I'll give you an example of that. I wrote about a guy once when I was living in China, who was a journalist, who was a Chinese reporter, who was a kind of social butterfly. He knew everybody in town. He was constantly on the move. And I found him fascinating, partly because he was so frenetic. And then I lost touch with him for a little while. And after a few months, I got in touch, and I said, his name is Lin Gu. And I said, Lin Gu, where are you? I've lost touch with you. And he said, oh yeah, well, it's because I became a monk. And I said, what do you mean you became a monk? And he said, yeah, I've been ordained as a Tibetan monk. I'm out on the Tibetan plateau. He said, but I'm going to be in Beijing in a few days, coming to visit my mom. Let's get together. So sure enough, we meet at this train station right near my house. And there he is. He's, wearing brown robes. He was at that point still I guess he was training to be ordained. He hadn't yet been ordained. He was wearing the sort of brown robes of a student monk on his way. And he made a joke when I saw him. He said, I'm a bit of a cliche, the middle class, anxious guy who becomes a monk. And I said, no, I take you for exactly your experience as you're having it. And we went to lunch. And it was just an amazing way of understanding not only his passage. I mean, he had basically decided that all of the things that he was seeking in China were, for him, an illusion. They were not real. They didn't feel meaningful. He didn't trust the government. He didn't trust the businesses. He didn't trust the facts of journalism as it was practiced. And so he went seeking this other thing in which to put his faith and his aspiration. And that's a story that you would never find. You couldn't put it in a newspaper. You can't go out and say, I'm going to go find myself a Chinese monk and tell the story of China's spiritual crisis through his journey. But it just sort of revealed itself over time. And that's the sort of thing that you can only get when you linger and you spend time just kind of waiting for history to unfold. I'll mention one other feature of New Yorker culture that I think is specific, and that is this slightly fanatical process of fact-checking that is often, if it's done right, invisible to the reader's eye, but is quite a unique institution in America, or really anywhere. There's just very few places that still do this. In the newspaper and magazine world, there's only the New Yorker and a little bit at the New York Times Magazine that do this. But for people who wonder, the fact-checking is a discrete, separate department within the magazine that operates a little bit like an auditing bureau of the reporter, It also operates like a research department where it's going back and sort of checking whether our matters of interpretation are accurate and so on. But it is large and robust. So I'll give you an example of how it feels in practice. So when I file a story to the New Yorker, let's say 10,000 words, the job of a fact checker, and usually they'll assign 2 or 3 fact checkers to a story of that length. Their job is to go through the article, and every single word, literally every single word, every down to the and a, has to have a tick mark through it by the end. And the tick mark means that it's been assessed on the basis of its factual validity. So to give you an example, if I say that I visited Joe Biden on a cloudy day in July, or I say a warm day in July, a fact checker, very characteristically, first they'll ask me, well, what day was it exactly? And then they'll take that day and they'll compare the weather on that day in the location where I was with historical climate patterns in that place to say, is it in fact a warm day, or was it not a warm day? Maybe it was a cool day. Now, some of this takes on a kind of slightly crazy quality because you begin to police yourself. And I'll give you an example of it. When I started first dating my wife, now my wife, but this was 12 years ago, and we've gone on a few dates, and she was on her way to Hong Kong for a work meeting. We were living in Beijing, and I said, "Oh, you're going to Hong Kong? That's so convenient." And she said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I have a scene that I'm writing in my story right now that took place, an interview that I did in a hotel room in Hong Kong, I'd done it a few weeks earlier. But I didn't know until I was back in the office writing up this scene that I was going to want to describe the couch where the person was sitting. You sometimes don't know until you sit down. Well, how are you going to invoke this scene? Are you going to describe their appearance? Are you going to describe the weather? Are you going to describe the physical location? It turned out that I needed to describe the couch. And it looked to me like it was a silk couch. That's what I thought. She was sitting on a silk couch. But I knew that if I wrote silk couch or silk sofa into my draft, that a fact checker would say, as they do 1,000 times, how do you know that? How do you know it was a silk sofa? So I said, would you, please go to the hotel and ask to go to that room and check if it's a silk sofa, see if you could actually figure it out. And she's like, all right, this guy seems a little weird, but all right, let's try it. I guess I'll do it. So she went. I said, just take a photo. That'll be enough. I'll share it with the fact checkers and we should be able to go from there. She took a photo of the couch, but I have to tell you, the photographic evidence was inconclusive. So I called meaning I couldn't tell if it was a silk sofa or if it was, polyester-like silk. Anyway, so I call the hotel and I say what I'm doing. And I say, I need to understand what the upholstery was in this room. And they think I'm a little crazy, but then they say, okay, we can get that for you. And sure enough, they came back and it was a rayon upholstered couch. And so I can tell you there ain't much literary merit in describing somebody as sitting on a rayon upholstered couch. So I had to change the damn lead of the thing. But I mention all that to say, as you can guess, when you apply that principle to a story about politics or about history, it is a level of rigor that is really quite unique in American life. And at the end of our stories, when you get to I write 4 big pieces a year. Each one takes about 3 months. And at the end of that process, we have always what's called the closing meeting. And that's the meeting in which the fact checkers and the editors and the writer are all in one place. And you go over the story word by word, sentence by sentence, and everybody has the chance to raise objections or to suggest revisions and so on. And you will oftentimes end up, going around and around on whether something should be one word or another word. And I often have thought, to any sort of civilian outsider who would be witness to this process, we would all be hustled off to immediate medical intervention. But actually, what it is a kind of respect for the process. And I think all of us come up to believe that it matters, and that you have to have that's kind of that sense of standard, or then the whole thing begins to give way. And so just one other bit on that I'll mention, because it is relevant, is very often, so the fact checkers in the course of a process, they will call the people you've interviewed and essentially re-interview them about the stuff in the story to make sure that they were not mischaracterized or misquoted. Now, sometimes a person who you call back up and you say, hey, it seems in this story you tell Evan that you are a pathological liar and a kleptocrat. Is that accurate? And the person will say, well, no, I never said that. What I said was that I'm prone to exaggeration. And at that point, we have, obviously, in most cases, we tape record an interview. I'm sitting there with my little tape recorder, so we have to rely on the tape. But we always try to give people an opportunity to make sure that we're not misunderstanding something they said. And very often, even down to the last small things, we are refining the story. So I'm sorry if any of that sounded almost like an advertisement. It just happens to be that I am quite a believer in this kind of doctrine of how we do it. And I've worked in a lot of different environments. I've written for other magazines. I've written for newspapers. I've done things on television and radio. And I can just tell you that there is nothing quite like the level of eccentric rigor that goes into a piece in the New Yorker. So I should stop talking there and let you ask whatever questions are on your mind. And
I want to start with a couple of questions that have been sent to me in advance. So in reference to both your book and your article, you pose the question if Biden can hold the center, or if he's really going to be a transformative president and bring together a divided country. On the one hand, recently, we've seen him try to bring in some of the climate activists and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez into his group. On the other hand, today we saw him taking a very cautious approach and going back to his kind of normal conservative approach when he said, well, I'll put together a committee to think about the Supreme Court. So the question is, you wrote this article close to 2 months ago. You've had a little bit of time to observe how the campaign is going and what positions he's taking. So I guess the question is, are you any more convinced now that he's going to be transformative, or are you thinking he's going to revert back to being his normal kind of conservative, middle of the road kind of a candidate or president?
Yeah, thank you for that. I have a sense of a couple of ways of looking at that. Number one is, look, he is less than 2 weeks out from an election in which he is leading by a historic margin. Even if we assume that some of that margin is overstated by the polls, he is in a position. He is leading to such a degree right now that, frankly, he'd be crazy to do anything that qualifies as bold or disruptive. What he would probably prefer to do would be to lock himself in a cabin in the woods and allow Donald Trump to continue talking at his leisure. Because every time Donald Trump opens his mouth, it seems to help Joe Biden. And Biden more or less told me that. I mean, he did tell me that. So there's a certain amount of thing, if you ask Joe Biden today, do you put on your pants with the left leg first or the right leg first? He'd probably say, well, a little of this and a little of that, because he does not want to rock the boat. So I think that's not cynicism. That's not calculation. That's just politics 101. And it would be malpractice for him to be staking out bold positions 2 weeks before Election Day. Now, that said, he is genuinely caught on the horns of this fundamental political dilemma about how much should he respond to the emerging emerging progressive wave within the party, and how much should he be an agent of a more conservative form of the Democratic Party. And to that, I would say that he is, I think, authentically and seriously a centrist. And that is not as much of an outlier view as it might sometimes appear to be when we watch television, or a lot of the attention in my business gravitates to people like AOC for all obvious reasons. She's an amazingly interesting and dynamic political personality. She obviously represents the future of a kind of Democratic Party that doesn't exist today and probably will in the future. But that's not where most of the party is. The truth is that most Democrats today, more than 50%, describe themselves as moderate or conservative. These are Democrats. And Joe Biden knew that when he came into this race. So he's the most conservative member of the field, and he's the one who won the primary. That does not mean, however, that he's frozen in amber, that he's this figure that is unchanged from 1972 or 1982 or 2012. He is responsive to what's happening. If you look at how he responded to the push for gay marriage, as we all know, he got there before Obama did. And the reason was because he saw where the country was going. And he seeks to be always in the center of the Democratic Party. And he has a kind of preternatural sense of fingertip feel for where the middle of the party is. So I wouldn't expect him to exclude AOC from his political orbit by any means. He invited her to be the co-chair of his climate task force alongside John Kerry. And at the same time, it's a fantasy to imagine that he's going to get somehow taken over by AOC and other figures on the left end of the Democratic Party. He is who he appears to be.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
How impactful do you think is the revelation concerning Trump's accounts in China concerning conflict of interest?
I don't think it has very much impact at this point. I don't know about you. I have a hunch that you might be in the same situation I'm in, which is enough already. We know everything we need to know about these two. And short of something truly that transforms our understanding of them, not that just confirms who we think they already are, it's going to be very hard to change the contours of this race at this point. I think the number of undecided voters, truly undecided voters, is relatively small. So no, I don't think it makes a huge difference. The same way that I don't think that the stuff that they're saying about Hunter Biden, most of which is unverified, is going to have much impact. They're sort of playing to the base. So I wouldn't count on that to make a big difference.
Barbara?
Well, since we're on China, I have a couple of questions for you about your experience in China. One person is asking, when you were most recently in China, what's your assessment of China as a country, its government, its relation with the Western world, and most importantly, its future? And another question was, how do you expect our policy to change, if at all, toward China if we have a Biden administration?
Well, I was there. I go about 4 times a year to China, and my most recent trip was right before the pandemic. I haven't been since the pandemic, of course. So it was. I was there in December, and pandemic started in January, and in China. I would say, and I'll be back when things, get a little more normal. I am concerned about the future of the U.S.-China relationship, and I'm very concerned about the direction of domestic Chinese politics. I mean, this is, I'd be saying exactly the same thing if I was sitting in Beijing, which is China has moved in an authoritarian direction since the rise of Xi Jinping in 2012. There's no other fair way to describe it. It is, I've written a lot about China in the last few years. I mean, in addition to having lived there for 8 years and written a book about it, it remains one of the primary focuses of my work. And, the piece that I wrote most recently, the title of it was taken from a Chinese expression, and the expression is fight, fight, talk, talk.
Mm.
And that refers to the ways in which I think China is more or less planning to engage the United States over the course of the years ahead, which is a combination of, sure, we can negotiate and get along, but also there are going to be moments when we are fighting with each other, hopefully not with arms, but fighting in some sort of political or diplomatic way. But we have fundamentally moved from a different era, the era that's defined a lot of my life with China. I've been going to China and studying in China for 25 years, going back to 1996, and we're in a different phase now, which is that there is just not a baseline level of cooperation and trust in the idea that these two powers would continue to develop together. And I'm afraid that period, that assumption, is not coming back anytime soon. So I'm worried. I think we should all be worried that we want to make sure we have an American leadership that takes this issue seriously. And at the moment, our China policy is chaotic, it's incoherent, it's full of contradiction, it's based on a kind of amateur form of kind of what they imagine to be muscular policy, and it's not serious. I think a Biden foreign policy, interestingly enough, is going to have some things in common with the Trump policy in that it's going to be confrontational, but it's going to be rooted in fact and in history. They understand essentially how China operates, how it makes decisions. Most importantly, we're not going to be doing it alone. That's the big mistake of the American policy. An America first diplomacy means an America alone diplomacy. It doesn't need to be that way. If we're going to challenge China on its trade practices, on intellectual property theft, we're stronger when we do it in concert with Western allies, with allies in Asia, Japan, South Korea, and so on. And that's what I think you can expect under a Biden administration if that comes to pass.
Thank you. Edward, you have another one?
Yes, this one concerns North Korea. At the beginning of the current administration, the number one foreign problem facing the United States was North Korea's development of nuclear weapons and missile technology. During the last 3 years, North Korea has not been deterred from these developments and appears to have made significant progress on these developments. Does Joe Biden have a strategy for dealing with this major national security risk?
It's a good question. I'm glad somebody asked me about North Korea. It reminds me that I should think about the North Korea Biden policy. I mean, as some people on this call may know, I was in North Korea during the nuclear crisis, and I was there and came back and wrote an article about how North Korea perceived the United States at that moment. I should mention, at the time we had Oliver, and we had our second child, Rosie, was my wife, Sarah Beth, was 6 months pregnant. And only after I came back did she say, all right, no more trips to North Korea. We're done with that for now. But she allowed me to go, in effect, which was an act of tremendous spousal generosity. I think the truth was I wouldn't go if I didn't have a sense that I could control the variables a bit and be relatively safe. So as much as it sounds like it's a dangerous place to be, it was one of the less sort of dangerous places you can be in a job like that. No is the answer. I think a lot of Biden's foreign policy team, but no, they don't have an answer to North Korea, no more than anybody else does. At this point, the Trump North Korea policy was essentially stagecraft. It was not meaningful. Nobody, and I say that with absolute confidence, nobody in the American intelligence community, nobody in the other domains that pay very close attention to these matters, whether we're talking about South Korean foreign policy circles or Japanese intelligence, nobody believed that Donald Trump going and shaking hands with Kim Jong-un was going to do anything except give Kim Jong-un a propaganda reel that he could use to try to shore up domestic support and show people at home that the rest of the world was treating him as a quote unquote great leader. And that's exactly what he did. It didn't impede the development of China's nuclear weapons at all. North Korea's nuclear weapons at all. So now, what I think a Biden administration is likely to do is to get back to the realm of what we reasonably can count on, which is ultimately the path to try to bring North Korea into a safer, more sustainable way to be, is by not acknowledging its right to have nuclear weapons and somehow saying that's okay, which is more or less what Donald Trump has done, but by trying to come up with a system of deterrence, a framework of arms control, use the toolbox that we know works. It worked in the Cold War and it can work again. Try to contain a power that we think is unreliable but fundamentally weak. And that's what we know about North Korea.
Okay.
Barbara?
In your book, you talk about Biden being somewhat reluctant to accept Obama's offer of the presidency. And he kind of put two conditions on that. One was that he always wanted to be the last person in the room. And the other was he wanted to have a significant role. He didn't just want to be sort of sitting on the outside cutting ribbons. So the question would be, given his attitude toward the vice presidency, how do you expect him to use Kamala Harris as a vice president?
Yeah,
I pose that question in a manner that assumes that he was winning, but let's, if he
Well,
wins, how would he use Kamala?
I think if he wins, then I think the question is quite well framed in the sense that he really does draw on his own experience as vice president in his imagining of what a Kamala Harris vice presidency should be like, which is to say he knows a few things that he doesn't want it to be. He does not want the vice president to be running a kind of crypto campaign for president from the vice president's office. I mean, this is the classic dynamic, is that you get this, the pairing of president and vice president is very often a kind of shotgun marriage. It's very rare that the two partners are long-standing cooperators. They often are both ambitious individualists who found their way into this position and now suddenly are paired up and holding hands on the podium. And when it works, as it did in the Obama-Biden administration, it's very productive. And that's because each one played a different role. And I mean, in the previous administration, Biden obviously was the link to Capitol Hill. Obama did not have those relationships. He hadn't been in the Senate very long. Biden is to the core a creature of the Senate. He kept his locker in the Senate gym, even after he was vice president, because he liked to go over there and just kind of kibitz. And Kamala Harris has a different set of skills and strengths. She's not going to have she doesn't have more of a connection to the Hill than he does. But she certainly has more of a connection to the outside world, and she speaks to a more diverse electorate. She is somebody who she's not the most popular candidate among progressives, that's for sure. But she represents history making in three regards. Both she's a woman, she's African American, and she's an Indian American. And in that way, she is a reflection of the country that Joe Biden is embracing and expects. And so I think it will take a little bit of getting used to one another, because Kamala Harris is known in the Senate as having a very clear sense of what she wants to do. Her staff is, they're not going to shy away from making their opinions known, and neither is Joe Biden's circle. And so for this to thrive, there has to be a bit of a recognition on Kamala Harris's part that the primary job of the vice president is to support the presidency. And she's already in a position now to be the heir apparent to the future of the Democratic Party. And in a way, the prudent thing to do would be to fortify that position by helping the administration succeed. And I suspect that's what she'll do. I think what I've seen so far, she's handled this very, very well, and has recognized the way in which they can both serve a slightly different role in trying to get to the White House.
Given that it looks likely that Biden will win the election, what do you think his cabinet will look like?
I think his cabinet is going to be more racially diverse than ideologically diverse. I think he is genuinely determined to have a cabinet, as he told, that looks like the country. That matters to him. I don't think he's gonna put people in the cabinet who he thinks are going to subvert politically or ideologically his view, which is a kind of centrist, encompassing, sort of aspirationally unifying position. Which is to say, he's not going to box out the left, but I wouldn't expect to see AOC as Secretary of the Treasury. So it's going to be some version of that. And but it is a meaningful fact when he says that the government, his administration, should look like the country. That's a big deal, particularly from where we're coming from over the last 4 years.
Here's an interesting one for you, Evan. As many of us, Ollie, have reached the voting age in the late 20th century, we were motivated by national goals, such as putting a man on the moon and defeating the Soviets. Today, the country is overwhelmed by extreme polarization and appears to lack a unifying sense of patriotic national purpose. Do you believe that Joe Biden agrees with this assessment? And how do you think he would define what his overriding national goal would be? And note, this would be a great theme for his inauguration speech, which you should offer to write.
I have a hunch that I wouldn't be the first in line for that opportunity.
I knew you'd like the closing part of that question.
There are a few people who are ready to go. It is, look, it is the defining fundamental fact and almost overwhelming challenge of this presidency is that, anybody coming into this job, even if it was, let's say, Barack Obama, who after all was elected really on as close to a unifying message as we've had since John F. Kennedy. I mean, the idea that he ran as somebody who says it's not blue America or red America, it was a really powerful concept. And you saw that in the data about Republicans who voted for Obama. Joe Biden is not, and I say this with support for what he stands for. He doesn't have that rhetorical kind of philosophical transcendent power the way that Obama did. What Biden has is something more modest, which is that he has a basic belief that the things that divide us obscure the things that actually unify us. And he may not be wrong about that. I have no doubt, as any of us know, the polarization in this country is profound and endemic and reaches way beyond the matter of who the next president is. It really gets to the core of our political culture, our media culture. It's about how we live and where we live. It's about who we see when we go to the grocery store. It's about all of the most elemental features of our lives. But what he also believes is that if we focus constantly on the things that divide us instead of the things that we actually agree upon, like, at the most basic level, having enough money to pay for roads and bridges, well, then we're doomed. And I think in that sense, the fact that he is to some degree able to come from that position, and I'll be blunt about it, because Barack Obama, where he's sitting here with us, would be blunt about it too. Joe Biden is also advantaged by the fact that he's a white guy who's not going to encounter the kind of racism that Obama did. And for that reason, he may, in a strange way, be able to get things done that Obama was not able to get done. But my biggest answer to the problem of how divided we are is that the answer in the end is not going to come down to who's in the White House. That's a part of it. But fundamentally, it also comes down to all of us. It comes down to our willingness, our ability to begin to imagine bringing the pendulum back into something that is more recognizable as a coherent country. And that comes down to things like our willingness to actually sort of imagine that people can change and that the country can grow and that we can get past these moments. I'm not willing yet to use the word forgiveness. I don't think I'm there yet, but there will come a point, if we want this to work, this political project, that we have to begin to imagine what it means to live together again. And that's not anything that a single president can achieve.
Please comment, if you can, how you anticipate tonight's debate will turn out, especially in comparison to the first debate.
Well, I mean, this is in the realm of pure speculation, so I'll just make up what I think is a conceivable answer. But look, they've already got control of the microphone, I gather, a little bit, so they'll be able to contain Trump a little more. He's been told by everybody who is around him that it only hurts him when he interrupts. But, you know, it's like the old parable of the frog and the scorpion. I mean, the scorpion says, or the frog says, will you carry me across the river? And the scorpion says, sure. And the frog says, well, just don't sting me. And the scorpion says, of course I won't sting you. And they get halfway across the river and the scorpion stings the frog and they both die. And the frog says to the scorpion, why'd you sting me? And the scorpion says, it's in my nature. So look, I think there is a certain piece of this that it is in Donald Trump's nature to be what he is in this debate. And I would be shocked if he wakes up tonight in the mode of Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. But that being said, I don't think tonight is a game changer. I mean, unless something really dramatic happens, but if you're Joe Biden, you're trying to keep this within the realm of containable activity. I should mention, I think I've got about another 5 minutes and before I'm supposed to go, but happy to take another couple of questions in that time, if that works for you.
Sure.
Okay, before you take this last question, I just want to read you a comment that expresses certainly how I feel, and I think how many of us feel. One of our authors writes, "Oh my, Evan Osnos, you give us so much hope for the future. So smart, kind, open, well-spoken, and insightful. I am so glad he was able to spend some time with us. Thank you for putting this presentation together." I think that speaks for all of us. But since you said you have time for one more question, we'll throw one at you. We have one of
Thank you for that.
One of our members.
I appreciate it.
I think, yes,
Go ahead.
thanks Cheryl for that. And also it really, I think, expresses how all of us feel. One last question then. Are you ever under any pressure to slant an article in a particular way?
Interestingly, and this may sound implausible to you, but the answer is no. I mean, I'm under constant pressure from the various participants and players in the stories. Everybody is trying to shape what the story is. I mean, to be a little bit funny about it, in China, where I lived for so long, there was a ministry of propaganda, and I sort of knew how to deal with that. In Washington, there are at a minimum 435 ministries of propaganda, one for each member of that House of Representatives, and then across the city. So I'm sort of constantly inundated by that. However, it's not that hard to resist. I don't have to work for anybody but our readers. And it is a miraculous privilege to be able to do that. And frankly, as an institution, sure, there are occasional moments where they'll try to I'll give an example. I mean, when I started working on the Biden story, there were people at the New Yorker who thought, this was back in, sort of early part of this year, January, February, and they thought, really, why would you want to write about Joe Biden? He just seems sort of like yesterday's news. He's not obviously the sort of exciting, dynamic person in the party. Are we really all that interested in him? And I just really believed actually that has nothing to do with my personal views on him. It's sort of irrelevant. It was more that I thought that he was closer to where the Democratic Party electorate was than some of the people that we in Washington and New York pay most attention to. And if we're doing a service to our readers, we're helping them to actually understand the landscape out there rather than just conforming to something that we already may believe to be true. So, and what is amazing is that absolutely nobody in this process, and as you've heard, it's a very intensive hands-on process, nobody ever said, maybe you should sort of steer it this way or steer it that way. If you begin to do that, then you snuff out this slightly strange little magic that makes the New Yorker work, which is that every writer has to believe that the thing they're working on is something worth doing. And you only do that when you allow that pilot light of kind of inspiration to keep burning. And I'm very fortunate for that.
Thank you, Evan, for a great presentation.
Thanks, folks. I'll see you again. Bye.
And thank you also to Dr. Burgee. Special thanks to Barbara Rosen. This program would not have been possible without her. And a special thanks to the OLLI team and the staff of President Burgee's office. OLLI would also like to give a special shout out to Catherine Sanford, Mr. Osno's sister, whose assistance made this event possible. Now, let us continue our New Yorker class discussion of today's presentation.
Does anybody have thoughts about, or maybe we should all turn our thoughts to, being of an age that most of us are, how do we encourage political participation? How do we rebuild these parties so that they are effective and that we do get good leadership?
Oh, hi. Yeah, I have two things. Maybe a suggestion to the lady that just asked that question. I think there was a lot. I attended a convention. It's called Netroots Nation, and it's a very progressive group of people. They get together and they bring all kinds of people that are in government and everything to talk about what's going on with campaigns and so on. And one of the things that one of the women said, sometimes it's how to be a candidate, one of their discussions or something like that, is what she said is the pressure from the outside, you have to keep that up, and the pressure from the inside, which would be the people that you've elected. So the two have to go together. I mean, I thought that was an interesting way of looking at it, because it seemed like to me, at least maybe when I was in that convention, that they brought up so many representatives from these various groups that have popped up in that are in the liberal party, liberal people, not necessarily part of the Democratic Party, but they put pressure on the Democratic Party by just, helping candidates to run and supporting them, and legislation, policy, they just had an influence. That was one of the things I want to say. The other thing that in Evan's article that popped out to me, and I mentioned it to one of my kids because they're kind of in that millennial era of age group. And he said about the vast difference of age between the people in the Senate, in the Congress, and House of Representatives, and the people that are the biggest voting groups that are coming along, the young people that are coming along, how they are some of the biggest numbers. And I thought, I don't know what anybody else has to think, but I think that makes a big difference. The fact of how, I'm just wondering, seeing in the future, whether younger and younger people will run, and, maybe to support that, to kind of look at that, but also to give, credit to the experience of the people that are in there. But a lot of things, I don't know that you could get it done without having experienced growing up younger than older. Because I know Obama made a comment about Joe Biden, that he said he was used to people working together. And he says he hopes he's in a whole different climate now, about people not working together. And that was his experience. So it makes a difference, how he goes about things. If he has expectations, that could be done again, Thanks.
The question was, what's going to happen to the parties? I think we have to vote and change the power. And instead of having a cult, which Trump has created, we need to have a togetherness where the people and the country come first. And that's what I like about Biden. I think that's what he can do. The Republicans will have to become something, because if Trump loses, and there'll be a lot of rethinking of views, I believe, by many of the Republicans who were sucked in by his commanding personality, and they're going to have to find a home. And I think the conservative people, who really were the core of the Republican Party, need to get back to their principles and be cohesive and form what was originally the Republican Party, the Republican Party my parents knew, and be willing to get rid of Mitch McConnell, who has, I think, destroyed our government terribly. And you have to work together, and we have to be very kind. I think the language that's being used now is so derogatory and certainly not helpful. I think we need ethics. I think we need to reevaluate who we are and make the best of us come through and be forceful. Thank you.
Well, I think what Pat is saying is right. I think what everybody is saying is right. But I recently, in the last 3 months, I spent a good deal of time in Wyoming with my daughter who moved up there. And I'm here to tell you, there are people who do not think like we do, who do not feel like we do in the world. And as I've flown most of the time, but this time we drove back from Wyoming to California. And from the middle of Wyoming where we were, down through parts of Idaho, down through parts of Utah, down through parts of Arizona and Nevada, the only signs of any political commitment that I saw along the way were for Trump. And these people are, they are not like us. And we and our younger iterations have got to come up with a way to respond or understand, because the people in Wyoming, Nevada, and so on are not going to try and understand us. There's been a tradition in America of anti-intellectualism from the very beginning. And now, because of the way the communication works and everything, it's part of the divide. People with an education are on one side and people with a high school diploma are on the other. And to a large degree, they don't read the New Yorker and they don't watch CNN. And I think part of the thing we have to figure out is how we can frame the discussions and the progress so that other Americans can not be afraid of it and not be antagonized by it. And I don't know how we do that, but I'm trying to do it with my grandkids and their friends, and get them interested in politics and information and checking information, learning how to be a critical reader of whatever kind of communication they're getting from the rest of the world. Thanks for letting me share.
Carol, may I ask a question of you? What was their main draw? What was their main philosophy that's so different from ours?
Well, part of it is the Wild West. Part of it is, like in Wyoming, they're a gun culture and everybody's got a gun strapped to their hip. And it's some places you walk into and it's like walking into Laredo in 1880. It's an independence. They don't want to be dependent on anybody else. Okay, or they're struggling, but they don't need help because they're independent and they are going to make their own way. And then the other thing too is there are a lot ranchers, farmers, oilers, and the problems of the urban areas don't interest them. They don't care about the homeless problem Los Angeles has got. They've got their problems and they're willing to deal with it, states' rights. But I think that's part of the issue that's separating the progressives from the conservatives. The conservatives like things the way they were in 1869, and the progressives want things to be what they can be in 2030. I think that's part of the issue.
Thank you.
I'm not going to speak very long, but listening to Cheryl, something I've been very concerned about for a while is to half of the country right now has devalued truth. They see no value in truth. They accept that lying is fine and they can make their own truth up. And I, for one, don't know how to change that back, but I'm very concerned with it. I think it's part of the fundamental gap between the parties. Anyone else is welcome to add on. Mm-hmm.
Do you think it's because the people, science is telling us that we don't want to hear what we don't want to hear, and so we just disregard it, make our own facts up?
I don't think it's because of science. I think it's because Trump pushed in with, I'm going to say things and get away with it. And you know it's not true. You know it's not what I said yesterday, but I'm going to get away with it. And this is, children do this at a certain age, at a young age. They'll lie and they'll push the parents to see what they can get away with.
Yep.
But it's become so accepted that I really don't know how to undo it. It's just a way of people getting away with things so they can have the world as they want it to be. And they don't have to apologize for it because no one cares whether something is true or not. They're all into their other facts, alternate facts.
Alternate facts.
I don't know.
Thank you, Judy. Diane Wallace.
Well, kind of a statement. My niece is the secretary of the Democratic Party in Nevada, and she's held that. It's an elective position for quite a while. She's more than devoted to the party. She probably puts 60 to 80 hours in a week. But what she's done over the years, and I totally admire her for it, she's developed a program, I believe it's called Emerge. And she's actually set this program all up where she's training women how to go into politics. And I guess she has gotten several people, or at least some women, she's helped promote them enough where they were elected to office in Nevada. I mean, she lives directly in Las Vegas. So that's kind of a comment. But I have another thing. We're going under the assumption that Biden's going to win. And that's, if you listen to what everybody in the group and everything is saying, what are we going to do if he doesn't win? What are we going to do if Trump wins? Does anybody have an answer?
That's a tough one, Diane, and you're right.
Well, nobody, it's just
right.
all assumptions one way, but what if it goes the other way?
And
We're going to have to live with it some way or another.
It may take several days, maybe weeks after the election before we.
Oh yeah, I don't think we're going to know who the winner is right off, but.
No. Grace.
Yeah, there's an awful lot going on here. And that's true of these areas also that we consider ultra conservative and different from us. For one thing, they get very different media from what we hear or see on TV. If you watch Fox News exclusively, you're going to have a very different view of the world than if you watch CNN or MSNBC. And if you live in anywhere except the coast, you're likely to have your radio restricted to Sinclair company, which is a very conservative group that monopolizes radio throughout the middle of the country. And so they're not hearing anything very positive from about Democrats, et cetera. I think, it's going to be very hard to get people back together again. But I think one thing that we absolutely need to do, and one reason that Trump was elected, is that we have been neglecting a lot of people in this country, not just the homeless in our areas, but we have talked about these people being the flyover country, the middle, the rural areas, the rust belts and all that. They have tremendous problems, and ranchers and farmers have problems of their own. They need to be recognized, and we need to be willing to spend time talking together, recognizing that people have problems, making commissions, or town halls or whatever it takes, and just stop ignoring people so that they turn to Trump and others like him out of desperation.
Why don't we wrap it up? And it was a wonderful program, and I thank you all so much for participating.
Could I add one more thing?
Sure.
One of the points about absence of truth, I think we all have a responsibility at OLLI and so forth. People sometimes, even in OLLI, they'll bring up stuff, and sometimes I'll ask, what source did you get it? I mean, if you're not sure, you shouldn't be promoting it. I mean, be careful, especially forwarding stuff. If you're not sure where it came from, just keep it to yourself. It's fine to look at anything you want, but you have a personal responsibility to make sure that the information you're sending out is from a good source. So that would be my point.
Day to day it's really difficult. I'm feeling it a lot, and I'm thinking that most everybody does. So on kind of the opposite of that, the Hospitality Committee has been trying to think of a way to make things just some interruption to this constant bombardment of stressful happenings and bad news that we seem to get all the time. And they have scheduled a virtual Halloween costume party, which is probably something that no one has ever done before in their lives. So it will cross something off of your bucket list. I would urge you to come. The point is nothing more than relax, a little laugh. You will see some people doing some very talented people in many, many areas, but maybe doing something that is not quite the way you expect them to be behaving. So hopefully you would have fun with it. The party is on Saturday, November 24th, this coming Saturday, starts at 4, goes to 5:30. The link information is on the standalone, the poster that went out on the last one, I think, was on Saturday, or in this week's announcements. You can also get on there and click on there. If you would give me the information that you are coming on my email address that you can reach me, it's on there too. And I've gone on long enough because I don't want you to get bored. I want you to be intrigued and think, let's go see what they're up to so we can know if this is a good thing to do or not. Thanks.
Thanks, Elaine.
You will get another view of Edward that what maybe some of you had never known before. It's absolutely delightful.
Thanks, Elaine. Well, let's call it a day, guys. Love you all.